The reason you feel exhausted by your own life isn't because you're not trying hard enough. It's because you're trying in the wrong direction. Every day, you wake up and push against life like you're swimming upstream. You plan harder, worry more, control tighter. And somehow, the more effort you put in, the more drained you feel. What if I told you that's not your fault? It's just how you've been taught to live. If you're listening right now, drop your location in the comments. I want to know where you are in this beautiful world, because what we're about to explore together works whether you're stressed in Seattle, overwhelmed in Mumbai, or just tired of being tired anywhere in between. Get comfortable. Grab a blanket, find a quiet corner, lie down if you can. Because over the next 3 hours, you're going to discover something that sounds impossible. The moment you stop fighting so hard, life starts working with you instead of against you. Here's what's going to happen. In about 15 minutes, you'll understand why your brain creates anxiety and how to work with it instead of against it. Around the 40-minute mark, you'll discover why the strongest people you know actually surrender more than they fight. And by the end, something inside you will feel lighter, not because I convinced you of anything, but because you remembered something you already knew. I'm not here to fix you. You're not broken. I'm just going to share 7 gentle truths that helped others find their flow again. Sometimes the most profound shift happens when we finally stop trying to shift. Ready to stop swimming upstream? Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus was the kind of gardener who checked his tomato plants 3 times a day. He'd wake up at dawn, rush outside, and inspect every leaf for signs of disease. He'd Google tomato plant problems at 2 in the morning. He installed a weather app that sent him hourly updates about potential storms. By midsummer, his garden was a disaster. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared so intensely that his plants never had a moment of peace. He'd overwater them one day, then panic and let them dry out the next. He'd move them around, searching for the perfect spot. His constant checking and adjusting created exactly the stressed environment his plants couldn't survive in. Meanwhile, his neighbor Janet, who watered her garden twice a week and trusted the process, harvested basketfuls of perfect vegetables. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but what does this have to do with my anxiety about my job interview next week? Everything. Your mind works exactly like Marcus's garden. Every thought you plant grows. Every worry you water becomes stronger. And the anxious checking, that constant mental scanning for what could go wrong, creates the very instability you're trying to prevent. Here's what most people don't realize about fear. It's not just an emotion you feel, it's a creative force. When you're deeply afraid of something, you unconsciously begin living as if it's already happening. Think about it. You're worried about losing your job, so you start acting differently at work. Maybe you second-guess yourself more. Maybe you avoid speaking up in meetings. Maybe you become so focused on not making mistakes that you stop taking the creative risks that actually make you valuable. Without realizing it, you've started watering the seeds of the very thing you fear. Or relationships. You're afraid your partner might leave, so fear whispers, better protect yourself. You start pulling back emotionally. You read extra meaning into their words. You create tests they don't even know they're taking. That fear-driven behavior, the very thing you thought would save the relationship, starts creating the distance you were afraid of. This isn't some mystical concept. It's simple psychology. When we're afraid, we make decisions from that fear. We speak from that fear. We act from that fear. And those fear-based choices create fear-based results. There's an old Zen story about a man who was so afraid of his shadow that he tried to run away from it. The faster he ran, the faster his shadow followed. He ran until he collapsed from exhaustion, but still the shadow remained. If he had simply sat down under a tree, the shadow would have disappeared. This is exactly what happens when we try to outrun our fears. The more energy we put into avoiding what scares us, the larger it looms in our experience. But when we stop running, when we simply sit with our fear without feeding it, something remarkable happens. It loses its power to control us. I remember Sarah, a brilliant marketing director who came to me completely exhausted. She'd been convinced for months that her boss was planning to fire her. Every email felt like a potential termination notice. Every meeting felt like a performance review. So she started working longer hours, trying to prove herself. She stopped delegating because she needed to control every detail. She began second-guessing presentations she would have delivered confidently before. Within 3 months, her performance had actually declined, not because she was less capable, but because fear had hijacked her natural abilities. The irony? Her boss had been planning to promote her, but her sudden change in behavior, the anxiety, the over-controlling, the loss of her usual confidence, made him wonder if she was ready for more responsibility. Sarah had become like Marcus in his garden, so focused on preventing disaster that she created the very conditions for it. This is what Buddha meant when he taught that we are shaped by our thoughts. Not in some magical way, but in the most practical way imaginable. Our thoughts influence our emotions influence our actions, and our actions create our reality. But here's the beautiful part, and this is where the garden metaphor becomes powerful. Just as Marcus could have chosen different seeds to plant, you can choose different thoughts to nurture. Your mind is like the most fertile soil on earth. It doesn't judge what you plant there. It will grow fear just as readily as it will grow peace. It will cultivate anxiety just as eagerly as it will cultivate confidence. The soil doesn't have a preference, but you, the gardener, get to choose. Now, I'm not talking about positive thinking or pretending everything is perfect. That's like planting flowers and pretending weeds don't exist. The weeds will still grow. What I'm talking about is becoming aware of what you're actually planting. Most of us are unconscious gardeners. We let any random thought take root and then wonder why our inner landscape feels chaotic. Let me share another story that illustrates this perfectly. There was once a Zen master who had 2 students working in his garden. One student spent all day pulling weeds, worried that they would choke out the flowers. The other student spent his time watering and caring for the flowers. At the end of the season, the first student had a garden full of disturbed soil and stressed plants. The second student had a garden so full of healthy, vibrant flowers that the few weeds were hardly noticeable. "Master," asked the first student, "how is this possible? I worked so hard to remove every weed." The master smiled and said, "You focused all your energy on what you didn't want to grow. Your friend focused his energy on what he did want to grow. Where you put your attention is where you put your power." This ancient wisdom is backed by modern neuroscience. Our brains are constantly forming new neural pathways based on our repeated thoughts and behaviors. Every time you think a fearful thought, you strengthen the neural pathway for fear. Every time you choose a peaceful thought, you strengthen the pathway for peace. You are literally rewiring your brain with every choice you make. Let me give you a practical example. Tomorrow morning, you have that presentation at work. Right now, your mind might be planting thoughts like, "What if I forget what to say? What if they ask questions I can't answer? What if this goes badly?" Every time you water those thoughts with your attention, they grow stronger. They send roots deeper into your consciousness. By tomorrow morning, you've cultivated a garden full of worst-case scenarios. But what if you chose different seeds? Not unrealistic optimism, but grounded possibility. "I've prepared well for this. I know this material. Even if I don't have every answer, I can handle questions honestly." Do you feel the difference? Not just in the words, but in how your body responds. One set of thoughts creates tension, shallow breathing, mental fog. The other creates calm alertness, deeper breathing, clearer thinking. This is what Buddha discovered under the Bodhi tree, not through revelation, but through careful observation of how the mind works. He noticed that suffering wasn't caused by external circumstances, but by our relationship to those circumstances. And that relationship is shaped by the thoughts we choose to cultivate. Buddha said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." This isn't mystical, it's practical psychology. Your thoughts create your emotions drive your actions, and your actions shape your life. But here's what's really fascinating, and this might surprise you. The thoughts that cause you the most suffering aren't usually thoughts about what's actually happening right now. They're thoughts about what might happen. Jennifer, a client of mine, realized she was spending 3 hours every evening worrying about a conversation she might need to have with her teenage daughter about her grades. 3 hours of mental rehearsal for a conversation that lasted 15 minutes and went much better than she'd imagined. She had watered seeds of conflict for weeks, creating stress about something that turned out to be a simple, loving exchange. This is the trap our minds set for us. We live in the future, planting seeds in tomorrow's garden, forgetting that the only soil we actually have access to is right here, right now. Let's try something together right now. I want you to think of something you've been worrying about lately. Don't judge yourself for it. We all have worries. Just bring one to mind. Now notice, what thoughts have you been planting about this situation? Are they thoughts that create more anxiety or ones that create more peace? Are they thoughts that make you feel smaller or ones that remind you of your strength? Here's what's fascinating. The situation itself hasn't changed, but simply becoming aware of your mental gardening starts to shift something. Awareness is like sunlight. It helps you see clearly which plants you want to keep growing and which ones have outgrown their purpose. Maya, a teacher I worked with, had been terrified of parent-teacher conferences for years. Every October, she'd spend weeks imagining angry parents, difficult conversations, criticisms of her teaching methods. By the time the actual conferences arrived, she was so anxious she could barely think straight. Then she started paying attention to her mental garden. She realized she'd been cultivating fear for weeks before each conference season. So she decided to plant different seeds. Instead of, "What if parents are angry with me?" she began nurturing thoughts like, "Most parents want what's best for their kids, just like I do." Instead of, "What if I don't have good answers?" she planted, "I care deeply about these children, and that caring comes through even when I don't know everything." The conferences didn't become perfect. She still had challenging conversations. But something fundamental had shifted. She was meeting those challenges from a place of groundedness instead of panic. And that changed everything, not just for her, but for the parents and students who felt her calm confidence. There's another Zen teaching that illustrates this beautifully. A student asked his master, "How do I stop negative thoughts from arising?" The master replied, "You don't. You simply don't invite them to stay for tea." This is so important to understand. The goal isn't to never have another fearful thought. That's impossible and would only create more anxiety. The goal is to change your relationship with those thoughts. To see them as visitors in your garden rather than permanent residents. When a fearful thought arises, you can acknowledge it. "Oh, there's that worried thought about the presentation again." You don't have to fight it or judge it, but you also don't have to water it with hours of attention. You can simply let it be there while you tend to other, more nourishing thoughts. This is what Buddha called mindfulness, not the ability to stop thinking, but the ability to observe your thoughts without being controlled by them. It's the difference between being caught in a storm and watching clouds pass through the sky. I want to share something that might change how you see your own struggles. Every single person listening to this right now has been an unconscious gardener at some point. You've planted seeds of worry, watered them with attention, and then wondered why your inner landscape felt chaotic. This isn't a character flaw, it's human nature. We were never taught how to be conscious gardeners of our own minds. But now you're learning. And the beautiful thing about mental gardening is that it's never too late to start over. The soil of your mind is always ready for new seeds. Here's a gentle practice you can try. For the next week, simply notice what you're planting. When you catch yourself in worry, ask, "What seed am I watering right now?" You don't have to immediately change anything. Just notice. Awareness is the first step toward conscious choice. Remember David, who was convinced his small business was going to fail. For months, he planted thoughts of scarcity, competition, and inevitable failure. His worry consumed so much mental energy that he stopped seeing opportunities, stopped networking, stopped innovating. His business struggled not because the market was bad, but because his fearful mindset had paralyzed his natural entrepreneurial instincts. When David began paying attention to his mental garden, he realized he'd been his own worst competitor. He started planting different seeds: gratitude for his loyal customers, excitement about solving problems, trust in his ability to adapt. His business didn't transform overnight, but his energy and creativity returned. And with that shift in inner climate, new possibilities began to emerge. This is the first sacred truth. You are always planting something in the garden of your mind. The question isn't whether your thoughts have power. They do. The question is whether you're choosing that power consciously or letting it run wild. Buddha taught that the mind is like a monkey, jumping from branch to branch, never still, always chattering. But even the most restless monkey can be trained with patience and kindness. Not through force, but through gentle, consistent guidance. So, how do you become a conscious gardener of your own mind? First, simply notice. Throughout your day, catch yourself in the act of thinking. What seeds are you planting right now? Are they seeds of worry or seeds of trust? Seeds of scarcity or seeds of abundance? Seeds of judgment or seeds of compassion? Second, remember that you always have a choice. Even in the middle of a worry spiral, you can pause and ask, is this thought helping me grow something beautiful, or is it just growing more fear? Third, be patient with yourself. Marcus didn't ruin his garden in one day, and he couldn't fix it overnight either. Mental gardening is a gentle practice, not a forced transformation. And fourth, this might be the most important, start small. You don't have to transform your entire mental landscape at once. Just choose one small kind thought to nurture today. Maybe it's, I'm doing the best I can, or things have a way of working out, or simply, I am enough. I want you to imagine your mind right now as the most beautiful garden space you've ever seen. Rich, dark soil full of potential. Morning sunlight filtering through the trees. The smell of earth after rain. In your hands, you hold seeds. Some are seeds of peace that will grow into moments of deep calm. Some are seeds of confidence that will bloom into quiet strength. Some are seeds of compassion that will create flowers of understanding. You also have seeds of worry, seeds of doubt, seeds of fear. This is normal. Every gardener has weeds to deal with. The question isn't whether difficult thoughts will arise. They will. The question is which ones you choose to water. Take a deep breath. Feel your feet on the ground. You are the gardener of your own inner landscape. And starting right now, you can choose to plant something beautiful. The ancient Zen masters understood something profound. The external world is often a reflection of our internal state. When your inner garden is full of fear, you see threats everywhere. When your inner garden is cultivated with peace, you see possibilities everywhere. This isn't about positive thinking, it's about clear seeing. As Buddha said, what you think, you become. What you feel, you attract. What you imagine, you create. Every moment is a chance to choose what kind of gardener you want to be. But here's what I haven't told you yet. Something that will challenge everything you've been taught about what it means to be strong. It's about why the most powerful people you know aren't the ones who fight the hardest, but the ones who know when to stop fighting altogether. That's what we're going to discover next. There's an ancient story told in Zen monasteries about two trees that grew side by side in a mountain valley. The first was a mighty oak, thick and powerful, its roots deep and its trunk unyielding. For decades, it had stood proud against every storm, never bending, never yielding. "Look at me," the oak would say to the wind. "I am stronger than you. I will not move." The second tree was a bamboo, slender and graceful, swaying gently with every breeze. The oak often mocked the bamboo's flexibility. "You have no strength," the oak would say. "You bend to everything. You have no backbone." One night, a fierce typhoon swept through the valley. Winds howled at speeds that could tear buildings apart. Rain fell in sheets so thick you couldn't see 3 feet ahead. The oak stood firm, muscles straining, fighting every gust with rigid determination. "I will not yield," it declared to the storm. The bamboo simply bent, dancing with the wind, flowing like water around every powerful gust. By morning, the oak lay uprooted, its mighty trunk split and broken. The bamboo stood tall, glistening with dewdrops, gently swaying in the calm breeze as if nothing had happened. This story isn't just ancient wisdom, it's a perfect metaphor for how we approach the storms in our own lives. And here's what might surprise you. Everything you've been taught about strength is probably backwards. We live in a culture that worships the oak. Push through the pain. Never give up. Control the outcome. Fight harder. Hold on tighter. We're told that real strength means gripping the steering wheel until your knuckles turn white. But what if real strength is knowing when to let go of the wheel and trust the road? There's another Zen teaching story about a master swordsman who was challenged by a younger, more aggressive fighter. The young warrior came at the master with tremendous force, expecting to overwhelm him with power and speed. But the master simply stepped aside, redirected the young man's energy, and let his opponent's own force defeat him. "How did you defeat me so easily?" the young warrior asked, humbled and confused. The master replied, "I didn't defeat you. I simply got out of the way and let your rigidity defeat itself. True strength knows when not to fight." This wisdom appears throughout Zen literature, the understanding that sometimes the most powerful action is non-action, the most effective response is no response, the strongest position is the most flexible one. Consider Michael, a successful lawyer who scheduled his life in 15-minute increments. He controlled his diet, his exercise, his career trajectory, even his social interactions. Everything had to go according to plan. When Michael's wife was diagnosed with cancer, he approached it like everything else in his life, with rigid control. He researched every treatment option, created spreadsheets comparing success rates, managed every aspect of her care. He worked longer hours to pay for the best specialists, scheduled his sleep to maximize his efficiency. For months, Michael held himself together through sheer force of will. He was the oak, standing firm against the storm of uncertainty. But storms don't care about your strength. They just keep blowing. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Michael was in his office, trying to coordinate 3 different doctor appointments while preparing for a major case, when his wife called to say her latest test results weren't good. That's when something inside him snapped. Not broke, snapped into a different position. like a bone that had been held rigid for so long that the only way to heal was to reset completely. Michael walked out of his office, drove home, and simply held his wife. No planning, no researching, no controlling. Just being present with what was actually happening. For the first time in months, he surrendered to the moment instead of fighting it. It was the strangest thing, Michael later reflected. Letting go didn't make me feel weaker. It made me feel stronger than I had in months. Not strong like I was fighting something, but strong like I was supported by something. This echoes a famous Zen story about two monks traveling together who came to a muddy river where a young woman was stranded. The first monk immediately picked her up and carried her across, then set her down and continued walking. The second monk was scandalized. Their order forbade touching women. For hours, the second monk stewed in judgment and anger. Finally, he could contain himself no longer. How could you touch that woman? You know our vows. The first monk looked at him peacefully and said, I put her down hours ago. You're still carrying her. This is the difference between flexibility and rigidity. The first monk saw the situation, responded appropriately, and let it go. The second monk clung to his rigid interpretation and carried unnecessary suffering for hours. This is what Buddha discovered about the nature of true strength. He said, in the confrontation between the stream and the rock, the stream always wins, not through strength, but through persistence and flexibility. Water doesn't fight the mountain, it finds its way around. Water doesn't argue with rocks, it flows over, under, and through them. And eventually, water shapes the entire landscape, not through force, but through gentle, consistent surrender to its own nature. But our culture has taught us to be rocks when we need to be water. There's a classic Zen koan about a student who asks his master, "What is the way?" The master points to a nearby stream and says, "Do you hear that water? It never argues with the stones that try to block its path. It simply flows around them, and in time, those very stones become smooth and beautiful." The student doesn't understand, so the master continues. The stones believe they are stopping the water, but the water is grateful to the stones. They give it something to dance around. This is surrender, not defeat, but a joyful acceptance of what is, while continuing to move toward what calls you. Think about the language we use around strength. Tough it out, grit your teeth, power through, don't let them see you sweat. All of this language assumes that strength means resistance, that power means force, that winning means never yielding. But have you ever watched a master martial artist? They don't meet force with force. They redirect energy. They use their opponent's strength against them. The most skilled fighters are the most flexible ones. There's a beautiful story about the founder of Aikido, Morihei Ueshiba. A young challenger came to test his strength against the elderly master. The young man charged with tremendous force, expecting to overpower the old teacher. Instead, Ueshiba simply stepped aside and gently redirected the attacker's energy, sending him tumbling harmlessly to the ground. "How did you do that?" the young man asked, amazed. Ueshiba smiled and said, "I did nothing. You defeated yourself. I simply showed you a different way to move." This is the essence of what Zen teachings call Wu Wei, action through non-action, power through yielding, strength through surrender. Or think about the strongest relationships you know. Are they the ones where both people are rigid, never compromising? Or are they the ones where both people can bend, adapt, and flow around each other's edges? Sandra learned this when her teenage son started struggling with depression. Her first instinct was to fix it, find the right therapist, create structure, push him to get better. Every day was a battle to get him out of bed, to engage with life, to be the kid he used to be. The harder she pushed, the more he withdrew. Her oak-like determination was met with his own form of resistance, complete shutdown. The house became a battlefield where love looked like constant struggle. Then, Sandra's therapist asked her a question that changed everything. What would happen if you stopped trying to fix him and started trusting him? This question reminded Sandra of a Zen story about a gardener who was so eager for his flowers to bloom that he would go out each morning and try to pry open the buds with his fingers. Each day, the flowers would wilt and die. Finally, an old monk passing by said to him, "You are trying to help the flowers, but you are killing them with your help. Trust their wisdom. They know when it's time to bloom." The question terrified Sandra. Wasn't it her job as a mother to solve his problems? Wasn't giving up on fixing him the same as giving up on him entirely? But Sandra was exhausted. The oak approach wasn't working. So she decided to try something that felt completely backwards. She surrendered. Instead of mourning battles about getting up, she left breakfast on the counter and a note saying she loved him. Instead of lectures about therapy, she simply made the appointments available if he wanted them. Instead of trying to manufacture his healing, she focused on creating a peaceful environment where healing could happen naturally. The change wasn't immediate, Sandra discovered, but something shifted in the house. The tension dissolved, and in that space, that peaceful, non-demanding space, he started to emerge on his own. Not because anyone forced him to, but because he finally had room to breathe. This is the paradox of surrender that Buddha taught. When you stop forcing outcomes, you create space for better outcomes than you could have imagined. When you stop gripping so tightly, you discover what was trying to come to you all along. But let's be clear about what surrender actually means, because there's a lot of confusion about this. Surrender isn't giving up. It's not becoming passive or apathetic. It's not letting people walk all over you or abandoning your responsibilities. That's not surrender. That's collapse. There's a Zen teaching that illustrates this perfectly. A student asks his master, "What's the difference between surrender and giving up?" The master takes the student to a river where salmon are swimming upstream. "Watch," the master says. The salmon surrender to the current when they need to conserve energy, but they never give up on reaching their destination. They work with the river's power instead of fighting it constantly, yet they maintain their direction and purpose. Real surrender is active, conscious, and incredibly powerful. It's doing everything you can and then releasing attachment to the specific outcome. It's like planting a seed. You prepare the soil, you water it, you give it sunlight, and then you trust the process of growth. You don't dig it up every day to check if it's working. Surrender is saying, "I will give my best effort, my deepest care, my fullest attention, and then I will trust life to meet me halfway. This is what David discovered when his startup was failing. For 2 years, he had controlled every detail, worked 18-hour days, micromanaged every aspect of the business. The harder he gripped, the more problems seemed to arise. Team members quit, investors withdrew, customers complained. David was like a man trying to cup water in his hands. The tighter he squeezed, the faster it leaked through his fingers. Finally, at 3 a.m. in his empty office, David sat back in his chair and said out loud, "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." It wasn't defeat, it was honesty. And in that moment of honest surrender, something opened up inside him. Instead of trying to control every outcome, he started focusing on what he could actually influence: his own actions, his own attitude, his own response to challenges. Instead of forcing his team to follow his vision, he started listening to their ideas. Instead of pushing against market feedback, he started flowing with it. The business didn't magically transform overnight, but David's relationship to the business transformed immediately. He became more creative, more collaborative, more responsive to opportunities. And in that state of flexible strength, the business began to find its natural direction. Buddha taught that attachment is the root of suffering. But attachment doesn't mean caring. It means demanding that life conform to your specific expectations. It's the difference between loving someone and needing them to be exactly who you want them to be. When you surrender attachment, you don't stop caring. You care more deeply, but with open hands instead of clenched fists. You love more fully, but without conditions. You work more effectively, but without being enslaved by results. There's a beautiful Zen practice called holding water. Find a quiet moment and cup your hands in front of you as if you're holding water. Now imagine that this water represents something you've been trying to control: a relationship, a job situation, a health concern, a family issue. Feel what it's like to hold this water gently, with soft, open palms. The water stays. It's supported, but not trapped. Now, imagine gripping tightly, trying to make sure none of it escapes. Feel how the water immediately starts leaking through your fingers. This is the difference between caring and controlling, between love and attachment, between strength and force. The water wants to stay in gentle, open hands, but it will always escape from hands that grip too tightly. Consider Rebecca, who learned this lesson when her adult daughter was struggling with addiction. Rebecca had made it her mission to save her daughter. She paid for rehab programs, staged interventions, called employers to explain absences, cleaned up legal messes. For 3 years, Rebecca poured every ounce of her energy into controlling her daughter's recovery. She researched every treatment center, monitored every phone call, tried to manage every aspect of her daughter's life. She was so busy trying to force healing that she forgot to simply love. The relationship became a battlefield. Every conversation was about sobriety. Every interaction was tense with unspoken expectations. Her daughter started avoiding her calls, skipping family gatherings, building walls against Rebecca's intense need to fix her. One day, exhausted and heartbroken, Rebecca attended a support group where she heard someone say, "You didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it." Those words hit her like a gentle lightning bolt. She realized she had been trying to carry a burden that was never hers to carry. Her daughter's recovery wasn't something she could force. It was something she could only support. Rebecca made the hardest decision of her life. She let go. Not of her love, but of her control. She stopped managing her daughter's recovery and started focusing on her own healing. She stopped trying to be her daughter's savior and started learning to be her mother. When the controlling finally stopped, Rebecca discovered something beautiful happened. My daughter called just to talk. Not because she needed something, not because she was in crisis, just because she missed our connection. For the first time in years, we had a conversation about something other than her addiction. This is the miracle of surrender. When you stop demanding change, you create space for change to happen naturally. When you stop forcing love, love has room to grow. When you stop controlling outcomes, better outcomes become possible. Buddha said, "You only lose what you cling to." This isn't a threat, it's a promise. When you hold things lightly, they're free to stay or go as they need to. And what stays, stays because it wants to be there, not because you've trapped it. So how do you develop this bamboo-like strength in your daily life? First, start noticing where you're being an oak. Where are you standing rigid against the storms of life? Where are you fighting battles that exhaust you without getting you closer to what you actually want? Second, practice the pause. When you feel yourself gripping tighter, whether it's in an argument, a stressful situation, or a moment of uncertainty, take a breath and ask, what would it look like to be water here instead of rock? Third, remember that flexibility requires core strength. The bamboo isn't weak, it's incredibly strong at its center. True surrender comes from a place of inner stability, not insecurity. You can be flexible with circumstances while remaining rooted in your values. And finally, trust the process. Water always finds its way to the ocean, but it never rushes there in a straight line. It follows the path of least resistance, flowing around obstacles, sometimes pooling in quiet places before continuing its journey. Your life has the same natural intelligence if you stop forcing the direction and start flowing with what wants to emerge. Think right now about one area of your life where you've been trying to be the oak, standing rigid against change, fighting circumstances, demanding that things be different than they are. What would it feel like to be bamboo in that situation? To maintain your strength while allowing flexibility? To stay rooted in what matters most while adapting to what you cannot change? Take a deep breath and feel into that possibility. Notice how your body responds to the idea of flowing instead of fighting. This is your inner wisdom recognizing something true, that real strength doesn't come from resistance, but from resilience. The most powerful forces in nature are the most flexible ones. Water carves canyons. Wind shapes mountains. Time transforms everything. None of them work through force. They all work through patient, persistent flow. You have that same power within you. The power to shape your world, not through force, but through the gentle, persistent strength of surrender. The wisdom to know when to stand firm and when to bend. The courage to let go of what you cannot control so you can focus your energy on what you can influence. This is the second sacred truth. True strength lives in surrender. Not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of trust. Not the weakness of giving up, but the power of letting go. Not the collapse of the oak, but the elegant resilience of the bamboo. But here's something that might completely change how you understand your own anxiety, and it has to do with where your mind spends most of its time. Because while your body is here in this moment, your thoughts are probably somewhere else entirely. And that's where your suffering actually lives. Let's explore that mystery next. There once was a woman named Grace who spent 37 years preparing for disasters that never came. Every morning, Grace would wake up and immediately begin her mental rehearsal of everything that could go wrong that day. What if the presentation at work went badly? What if her daughter got into an accident driving to school? What if the strange noise the car was making meant an expensive repair? What if? What if? What if? Grace became an expert at living in tomorrow's problems. She would spend hours each evening worrying about conversations she might need to have, challenges she might need to face, disasters she might need to survive. Her mind was like a movie theatre that only showed horror films about the future. The irony was heartbreaking. The prostit ended next time. While Grace was busy preparing for imaginary emergencies, real life was happening all around her. Her daughter's first steps, her husband's quiet jokes at dinner, the way morning sunlight fell across her kitchen table, all of these precious moments slipped by unnoticed because Grace was somewhere else entirely, fighting battles in a future that existed only in her mind. One autumn evening, Grace's daughter asked her a simple question that changed everything. "Mom, do you ever actually see me?" The question stopped Grace cold. Of course, she saw her daughter. She worried about her constantly. She planned for her future, protected her from potential harm, anticipated her needs. But her daughter continued gently, "I mean, do you see me right now? When I'm talking to you, are you here with me, or are you somewhere else worrying about tomorrow?" In that moment, Grace realized she had been living like a ghost in her own life. Physically present, but mentally absent, always somewhere else, always someone else. She had spent decades preparing for a future while missing the only time that actually existed, right now. This is the third sacred truth that Buddha discovered 2,500 years ago. Anxiety cannot exist in the present moment. It lives entirely in the mind's projections of what might happen, could happen, should happen, but isn't happening right now. Think about it. When you feel anxious, where is your mind? It's racing ahead, building stories, spinning scenarios, dragging you into a world that doesn't yet exist. A world of what-ifs and maybes, of imagined conversations and potential disasters. But here's what's remarkable. While your mind is time-traveling to tomorrow's troubles, your body remains anchored in this moment. Your breath is happening now. Your heartbeat is happening now. Your feet are touching the ground now. The only place life truly exists is right here, right now. There's an ancient Zen story about a monk who was walking through a forest when he encountered a tiger. The tiger began chasing him, and the monk ran until he came to the edge of a cliff. With no other choice, he grabbed a vine, and began lowering himself down the cliff face. As he hung there, the monk looked up and saw the tiger prowling at the top of the cliff. He looked down and saw another tiger waiting at the bottom. Then he noticed two mice, one black and one white, gnawing at the vine that held him. In that moment of complete peril, the monk noticed a wild strawberry growing from the cliff face. He reached over, plucked it, and ate it. It was the sweetest thing he had ever tasted. This story isn't about ignoring danger or being reckless. It's about the profound peace that comes from being fully present, even in difficult circumstances. The monk could have spent his time worrying about the tigers above and below, or the mice gnawing at his lifeline. Instead, he found the sweetness available in that exact moment. Most of us live our lives like Grace did, so focused on the tigers we imagine might be coming that we miss the strawberries right in front of us. Our minds are incredible time machines. They can transport us instantly to any moment in the past or future. But here's what no one tells you. This amazing ability is also the source of most of our suffering. Because when your mind travels to tomorrow, it usually doesn't pack a suitcase full of good possibilities. It packs anxiety, worry, and fear. Buddha observed this pattern with remarkable clarity. He noticed that people suffer far more in their imagination than they do in reality. We create elaborate mental movies of future disasters, then experience all the emotions as if these imagined events were actually happening. Consider how much time you spend each day worrying about things that haven't happened yet. That difficult conversation you might need to have with your boss. The health scare that a minor symptom might represent. The financial problems that could arise if certain things go wrong. The relationship challenges that might emerge if your partner's mood means what you think it means. Now, consider this. How many of your past worries actually came true exactly as you imagined them? How many of the disasters you prepared for actually happened? And of those that did occur, how many were as catastrophic as your mind predicted? There's another beautiful Zen teaching about a student who came to his master in great distress. "Master," the student said, "I'm constantly worried about my future. I can't sleep, I can't concentrate, I can't find peace." The master handed him a heavy stone and said, "Carry this with you everywhere you go today. Don't put it down." By evening, the student was exhausted. His arms ached, his back hurt, and he could barely function with the weight of the stone. "Master," he said, "this stone is so heavy, it's making everything impossible." The master smiled and said, "That stone weighs the same whether you carry it for 5 minutes or 5 hours. The pain you feel isn't from the weight of the stone, it's from how long you've been carrying it." Your worries about the future are the same. They don't become heavier over time, but carrying them constantly exhausts you. "But how do I put down my worries?" the student asked. "The same way you put down the stone," the master replied. "You simply let go." This is the essence of mindfulness, not the buzzword version that's been commercialized, but the actual practice that Buddha taught. It's the gentle art of returning to now. Not forcing yourself to stay present, but noticing when you've wandered into tomorrow's troubles and kindly guiding your attention back home. Jennifer discovered this when she realized she was spending 3 hours every evening mentally rehearsing a conversation she might need to have with her teenage daughter about her grades. 3 hours of imagined conflict, practiced arguments, anticipated resistance, all for a conversation that, when it actually happened, lasted 15 minutes and went far better than she'd feared. I was living in a completely different reality, Jennifer reflected. I was having fights that weren't happening with a person who wasn't even upset. I was solving problems that didn't exist while missing the chance to simply enjoy my daughter's company. This is what Buddha meant when he said that most of our suffering exists between our ears. The present moment rarely contains the drama our minds create about it. Right now, as you listen to these words, you are probably okay. You are breathing. Your heart is beating. You are here, you are alive, and in this moment, you are safe. But the mind is like a restless child on a long car trip, constantly asking, are we there yet? What if we get lost? What if we run out of gas? It can't simply enjoy the journey. It's always worried about the destination. There's a profound Zen teaching that says, you are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement. This isn't a contradiction. It's pointing to the truth that this moment is complete exactly as it is, while also acknowledging that growth and change are natural. But you can't improve a moment you're not actually present for. The practice of returning to now doesn't require special techniques or years of meditation training. It's as simple as noticing where your mind has wandered and gently bringing it back. Like calling a beloved pet who has wandered too far from home, not with punishment, but with kindness. Here's a gentle practice you can try right now. Notice 5 things you can see in your immediate environment. Really see them, not just glance at them. Notice their colors, textures, the way light falls on them. Now notice 4 things you can hear. Maybe it's the sound of your own breathing, or traffic in the distance, or the hum of electronics. Don't judge the sounds as good or bad, just notice them. Notice 3 things you can feel: the temperature of the air on your skin, the texture of your clothes, the weight of your body, where you're sitting or lying. Notice 2 things you can smell. Even if you think you can't smell anything, breathe deeply and see what's there. Notice 1 thing you can taste. Maybe it's just the taste of your own mouth or lingering flavors from something you drank earlier. This simple practice, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, brings you fully into your senses, which are always operating in the present moment. Your eyes can't see yesterday. Your ears can't hear tomorrow. Your senses are perfect anchors to right now. Buddha taught that the present moment is the only place where life actually happens. The past exists only in memory, the future only in imagination. But we spend so much time mentally time traveling that we miss the one place where we actually have any power to create change, right here, right now. There's a story about a Zen master who was asked, "What is enlightenment?" He replied, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." The questioner was confused. "But everyone does that. What's so special about it?" The master smiled. "No, they don't. When most people eat, they're thinking about work. When they sleep, they're worrying about tomorrow. When they're at work, they're thinking about home. When they're home, they're thinking about work. Very few people are ever truly where they are." This is why mindfulness isn't about emptying your mind or stopping thoughts. It's about being where you are when you are there. It's about eating when you're eating, walking when you're walking, breathing when you're breathing. Mark learned this lesson when his doctor told him he had high blood pressure from chronic stress. Mark was a project manager who lived in a constant state of anticipating problems. He would lie awake at night, running through everything that could go wrong with his current projects, mentally solving crises that hadn't happened yet. I realized I was living my entire life in crisis mode, Mark said. I was always preparing for emergencies, always on high alert, always somewhere else mentally. My body was paying the price for my mind's obsession with imaginary futures. Mark began practicing what he called moment alerts, simple check-ins throughout the day where he would pause and ask himself, where am I right now? What is actually happening in this moment? Most of the time, the answer was surprisingly peaceful. He was sitting at his desk, typing an email, with sunshine coming through the window. He was walking to a meeting, feeling his feet on the ground, noticing the changing leaves on the trees. He was having dinner with his family, tasting his food, hearing his children's laughter. I started to realize that most of my life was actually quite pleasant when I was actually present for it, Mark discovered. The stress wasn't coming from what was happening, it was coming from what I was afraid might happen. This is the profound insight Buddha had about the nature of anxiety. It feeds on the unknown, the uncertain, the not yet here. But in the present moment, even in difficult circumstances, there's usually a basic okayness that anxiety can't touch. Right now, as you listen to this, notice, are you okay in this moment? Not next week when that deadline hits, not next month when that situation needs to be resolved, but right now. In this breath, in this heartbeat, in this immediate experience, are you fundamentally okay? Most people discover that the answer is yes. The present moment has a quality of basic safety that the mind's projections of the future rarely contain. This doesn't mean problems don't exist or challenges won't come. It means that right now, in this moment, you are breathing, you are alive, and you are here. Buddha said, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." This isn't about ignoring practical planning or learning from experience. It's about recognizing that worrying is not the same as planning, and that anxiety about the future doesn't actually prepare you for it. It just exhausts you in the present. There's a beautiful practice from Zen tradition called just sitting. It's remarkably simple. You sit quietly and just be present with whatever arises. Thoughts come and go like clouds in the sky. Emotions arise and pass like weather patterns. But you remain like the sky itself, spacious, aware, and fundamentally unchanged by whatever passes through. You don't need to sit on a cushion to practice this. You can practice just standing while waiting in line at the store. Just walking as you move from one place to another. Just breathing whenever you remember that you have breath. The key is gentleness. When you notice your mind has wandered into tomorrow's troubles or yesterday's regrets, don't scold yourself. Simply notice where you've gone and kindly return. Think of it like guiding a beloved friend back home with patience, understanding, and love. Lisa, a mother of 3, developed what she called red light meditation. Whenever she was stopped at a traffic light, instead of using the time to mentally organize her to-do list or worry about running late, she would take 3 conscious breaths and notice what she could see, hear, and feel right then. It was amazing how those tiny moments of presence started to change everything, Lisa shared. I realized I had been living my whole life rushing toward the next moment, never actually experiencing the one I was in. Those red light moments became little islands of peace in my day. This is the practice, not grand gestures or dramatic changes, but simple moments of choosing to be where you are. Noticing the taste of your morning coffee instead of mentally rehearsing the day ahead. Feeling the warm water in the shower instead of worrying about what you forgot to do yesterday. Listening to your child's story instead of planning dinner while they talk. Each time you return to the present moment, you're training your mind like a muscle. You're teaching it that there's a difference between helpful planning and anxious worry. You're discovering that most of life's sweetness is available only to those who are present to receive it. Buddha taught that this moment, right here, right now, contains everything you need. Not everything you want, not everything you hope for, but everything you truly need to be okay. Your breath, your awareness, your basic aliveness, all of it is here waiting for you to come home to yourself. The third sacred truth is simple but revolutionary. Anxiety lives in tomorrow, peace lives in now. You cannot be anxious and present at the same time. They are mutually exclusive states. When you are truly here, truly now, anxiety has nowhere to exist. This doesn't mean you'll never feel worried again. Worry is a natural human response to uncertainty. But you'll start to notice the difference between useful concern that motivates appropriate action and useless anxiety that just churns in your mind. You'll learn to address what you can address and release what you cannot control. But here's something that might surprise you about all this worrying we do. Most of the disasters we spend so much time preparing for in our minds never actually happen. And that's not just a comforting platitude. It's a statistical reality that reveals something profound about how the human mind works. Let's explore that mystery next. There once was a small mountain village where the elders told stories of a great flood that had devastated their ancestors centuries ago. The stories were passed down through generations, growing more dramatic with each telling. The flood became a monster that could return at any moment, and the villagers lived in constant preparation for its arrival. Every spring, when the mountain snow began to melt, the entire village would go into emergency mode. They would sandbag their homes, move their belongings to higher ground, and spend sleepless nights listening for the sound of rushing water. Families would argue about evacuation plans. Children would have nightmares about drowning. The whole community existed in a state of chronic tension for months at a time. This went on for decades. Each year, the villagers would exhaust themselves, preparing for the disaster that never came. The river would rise a little with the spring melt, as rivers do, but it never even approached the levels that would constitute a real threat. Yet each year, they convinced themselves that this spring would be different. This would be the year the monster returned. One spring, a young engineer arrived in the village to study the watershed. She examined decades of river data, studied the terrain, and calculated water flow patterns. Her conclusion was startling. Given the current landscape and normal weather patterns, a flood of the magnitude the villagers feared was virtually impossible. The geography had changed since their ancestors' time. New forests upstream absorbed excess water. Natural channels had formed that redirected flow. The very conditions that had created the historical flood no longer existed. The villagers had been preparing for a disaster that couldn't happen. But when the engineer presented her findings, many villagers rejected them. "You don't understand," they said. "You haven't lived here your whole life. You don't know what we know. It's better to be prepared than sorry." They continued their anxious preparations, choosing familiar fear over unfamiliar peace. This village exists in countless forms in our modern world. We are all preparing for floods that will never come, fighting wars against enemies that exist only in our imagination, building defenses against threats that dissolved long ago. Buddha observed this pattern with remarkable clarity 2,500 years ago. He noticed that human beings spend enormous amounts of energy preparing for disasters that exist primarily in their minds. He called these mental formations the stories our minds create about reality that become more real to us than reality itself. There's a lesser-known Zen story about a monk who was terrified of tigers. Every night, he would lie awake, listening for the sound of prowling tigers outside his monastery. He carried a stick wherever he went, ready to defend himself. He developed elaborate plans for tiger encounters and memorized escape routes through the monastery grounds. His fellow monks grew concerned about his obsession. "Brother," one of them finally said, "there are no tigers in this region. There haven't been tigers here for over 100 years. But the frightened monk replied, "That's exactly what makes them so dangerous. No one expects them. That's when they'll strike." The abbot, hearing about this conversation, called the tiger-obsessed monk to his chambers. "Tell me about these tigers you fear," the abbot said gently. The monk described them in vivid detail: their size, their stealth, their ferocity, the sound of their breathing in the darkness. The abbot listened patiently, then asked a simple question. "Have you ever actually seen one of these tigers?" "Well, no," the monk admitted, "but I've heard them. I've sensed their presence." The abbot smiled compassionately. "My dear friend, you have created tigers so real in your mind that you can hear them, smell them, feel their presence. But they exist nowhere except in your thoughts. You are not afraid of tigers. You are afraid of your own imagination." This is the fourth sacred truth. Most of the storms we prepare for never arrive. Most of our fears are phantom fears, created by minds that have evolved to scan for danger, but haven't learned to distinguish between real threats and imaginary ones. Consider your own life for a moment. Think back over the past 5 years and remember all the things you worried about. The job you might lose, the relationship that might end, the health scare that might be serious, the financial problems that might overwhelm you. How many of those feared disasters actually materialized exactly as you imagined them? Most people discover that the vast majority of their worries never come to pass. And of those that do manifest in some form, they rarely unfold as catastrophically as the mind predicted. We are remarkably resilient creatures, far more capable of handling actual challenges than our anxious minds give us credit for. There's another Zen teaching story about a merchant who was traveling to a distant city with a valuable cargo. Along the way, he heard rumors of bandits who robbed travelers on the road ahead. The merchant became so frightened that he turned around and went home, abandoning his trading mission entirely. Years later, he learned that there had never been any bandits on that road. The rumors were started by a competitor who wanted to discourage trade. The merchant had lost not only potential profits, but also the opportunity to establish valuable relationships in that distant city. His fear of an imaginary threat had cost him very real opportunities. Buddha taught that our minds are like this merchant, often more afraid of imaginary dangers than attentive to actual possibilities. He called this the second arrow of suffering. The first arrow is what actually happens: loss, disappointment, challenge, change. The second arrow is the story we tell ourselves about what happened, and more often, what might happen next. The first arrow is inevitable. Life includes difficulty. But the second arrow is optional. We don't have to shoot ourselves with imaginary arrows while we're already dealing with real ones. Consider Sarah, who spent months in agony about a potential layoff at her company. Every day brought new waves of worry about losing her job, being unable to pay her mortgage, having to explain unemployment to her children. She lost sleep, developed stress-related health issues, and became irritable with her family. She was living the experience of being unemployed while still being employed. When the layoffs were finally announced, Sarah's position was eliminated. But instead of the catastrophe she had imagined, she discovered that her severance package was generous, the job market in her field was strong, and she actually found a better position within 6 weeks. She had suffered for months, anticipating a disaster that never occurred. I realized I had been living in a horror movie of my own creation, Sarah reflected. The actual experience of losing my job and finding a new one was far less traumatic than the months I spent imagining it would be. I had wasted so much energy fighting phantoms. This pattern is so common that Buddha developed specific teachings about what he called mental formations, the habitual ways our minds construct reality. These formations are like filters that shape what we see, feel, and experience. When our mental formations are dominated by fear, we see threats everywhere. When they're shaped by peace, we see opportunities. The mind that created tigers in the monastery is the same mind that sees catastrophe in every change, betrayal in every silence, rejection in every delayed response. It's not deliberately trying to make us miserable, it's trying to keep us safe. But it often can't tell the difference between actual danger and potential danger, between reasonable caution and paralyzing fear. There's a profound Zen story about a master who was known for his fearlessness. A student asked him, "Master, aren't you afraid of anything?" The master replied, "I'm afraid of many things, but I've learned to distinguish between the tigers that are actually in the room and the tigers that are only in my mind." "How can you tell the difference?" the student asked. The master smiled. "The real tigers require action. The imaginary tigers require only understanding." This is the key to working with phantom fears, learning to distinguish between threats that require action and fears that require only understanding. When you feel afraid, pause and ask yourself, is this tiger real or is this tiger imaginary? A real tiger might be a legitimate health concern that needs medical attention, a relationship issue that requires honest conversation, or a work situation that needs addressing. These situations call for appropriate action, not just worry. An imaginary tiger is usually a story about what might happen, could happen, probably will happen, but isn't happening right now. These stories create all the physiological responses of real danger, without any of the clarity that comes from facing actual challenges. Let's try a simple practice for checking whether your fears are phantom or real. When you notice yourself feeling anxious about something, ask these questions. First, is this happening right now, or is this a story about what might happen? If it's happening now, you can take appropriate action. If it's a story about the future, notice that it's a story. Second, if this did happen, what would I actually do? Often, when we move from vague worry to specific planning, we discover we're more capable than our fears suggest. Fear thrives in vagueness, but diminishes when we get specific. Third, how many times have I worried about this kind of thing before, and how many times has it actually been as bad as I feared? This helps you recognize patterns in your worry and develop trust in your resilience. Fourth, what am I not seeing because I'm so focused on this potential threat? Fear narrows our vision, but awareness opens it. When we stop staring at imaginary tigers, we often notice real opportunities. Michael discovered this when he was terrified about giving a presentation to his company's board of directors. For weeks, he imagined every possible way it could go wrong. He would forget his words, the technology would fail, they would ask questions he couldn't answer, they would think he was incompetent. Using the fear-checking practice, Michael asked himself, is this happening right now? No, it was 3 weeks away. What would I actually do if these things happened? He realized he could prepare backup slides, practice handling difficult questions, and remember that his expertise was why he'd been asked to present in the first place. How many times have I worried about presentations before? Michael remembered that every presentation he'd given had gone far better than he'd feared. What am I not seeing? He realized he was so focused on potential failure that he wasn't preparing for potential success. When Michael shifted his attention from imaginary disasters to actual preparation, something remarkable happened. His anxiety decreased, his confidence grew, and he began to see the presentation as an opportunity rather than a threat. The presentation went well, not because nothing went wrong, but because he was prepared to handle whatever arose. This is what Buddha meant when he taught about the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is what happens. The actual challenges, losses, and difficulties of life. Suffering is what we add to pain through our mental formations, our stories about what it means and what it will lead to. The villagers preparing for phantom floods were suffering far more than they would have from an actual flood. Their fear consumed more resources, caused more stress, and created more problems than the disaster they were preparing for. They had confused preparation with worry, caution with anxiety, wisdom with fear. There's a beautiful Zen saying, "You are an aperture through which the universe is looking at and exploring itself." But when that aperture is clouded by fear, the universe can only see threats and dangers. When the aperture is clear, the universe sees infinite possibilities. Buddha taught that most of our suffering comes not from what is, but from what we think is, what we fear is, what we imagine is. He called these mental formations the clouds that obscure the clear sky of awareness. The sky is always clear and spacious, but we can become so focused on the clouds that we forget the sky exists. This doesn't mean being naive or unprepared. It means distinguishing between reasonable preparation and anxious obsession. It means responding to what is rather than reacting to what might be. It means trusting your ability to handle whatever comes while not borrowing trouble from an imaginary future. Jessica learned this when she was diagnosed with a condition that required regular monitoring. Her mind immediately went to worst-case scenarios: cancer spreading, treatments failing, leaving her children motherless. She spent weeks in a state of anticipatory grief for a future that existed only in her imagination. Then, Jessica's doctor gave her actual statistics about her condition. The vast majority of people with her diagnosis lived normal, healthy lives with proper monitoring. The treatments were highly effective. The condition was manageable, not terminal. I realized I had been living in a completely different reality than what was actually happening, Jessica said. I had created a tragic story about my future that had no basis in medical facts. I was grieving for a death that probably wouldn't happen for decades, if at all. This is the insidious nature of phantom fears. They feel completely real because fear is real, even when its object is imaginary. Your body doesn't know the difference between an actual tiger and an imagined one. It responds with the same flood of stress hormones, the same fight or flight activation, the same sense of urgency and dread. But your mind can learn to make this distinction. Through practice, you can develop what Buddha called right understanding, the ability to see clearly what is actually happening versus what you fear might happen. The practice is gentle but revolutionary. When you catch your mind creating phantom tigers, you don't fight or suppress the fear. You simply recognize it with compassion. Ah, there's my mind trying to protect me by imagining dangers. Thank you, mind, for caring about my well-being. Now, let's look at what's actually here. This recognition doesn't eliminate appropriate caution or planning. It eliminates the exhausting mental rehearsal of disasters that will probably never occur. It frees up tremendous amounts of energy that can be used for creating, connecting, enjoying, and responding skillfully to what actually needs attention. There's another Zen story about a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbors said, "How terrible, what bad luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned with 3 wild horses. The neighbors said, "How wonderful, what good luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe." The day after, the farmer's son was thrown from one of the wild horses and broke his leg. "How terrible," the neighbors said. "Maybe," said the farmer. The following week, military officials came to draft young men for war, but they passed over the farmer's son because of his broken leg. "How fortunate," the neighbors exclaimed. "Maybe," said the farmer. This story illustrates the profound futility of predicting whether events will ultimately be good or bad. Life is far too complex, interconnected, and surprising for our limited perspectives to accurately forecast outcomes. What we fear as disaster often leads to unexpected opportunities. What we celebrate as good fortune sometimes brings unforeseen challenges. The farmer's wisdom wasn't indifference, it was presence. He responded appropriately to each situation as it arose without wasting energy on stories about what it all meant or where it would lead. He lived in reality rather than in his projections about reality. This is the fourth sacred truth. Most storms never arrive. Most of our fears are phantom fears, created by minds that mean well but see danger where none exists. When we learn to distinguish between real tigers and imaginary ones, we stop fighting battles against enemies that exist only in our thoughts. But here's what's really fascinating about this need to prepare for disasters that don't come. It often masks something deeper, a fundamental struggle with the fact that life is uncertain and we cannot control outcomes no matter how much we plan or worry. And that brings us to perhaps the most challenging truth of all. Let's explore that next. There was once a renowned river guide named Chen who had navigated the same mountain rapids for 20 years. He knew every rock, every current, every hidden danger along the treacherous route. Tourists would pay handsomely for his expertise, trusting their lives to his skill and experience. Chen prided himself on controlling every aspect of the journey. He would study weather patterns days in advance, check and recheck his equipment, brief his passengers on exactly when to paddle and when to hold still. His motto was simple: leave nothing to chance. One spring, the mountain snows melted faster than usual, and the river swelled beyond anything in Chen's experience. But Chen was confident in his ability to manage even these extreme conditions. He had always conquered the river before. This time would be no different. As they launched into the rapids, Chen fought the water with everything he had. He paddled against currents that were clearly stronger than his boat. He tried to force his raft through passages that the swollen river had made impassable. He barked commands at his passengers, demanding they paddle harder against forces beyond their control. The harder Chen fought, the more chaotic the journey became. His raft spun wildly, crashed into rocks, and took on water. His passengers, sensing his panic, began to panic themselves. What should have been an exhilarating ride became a terrifying battle against nature. Meanwhile, on the same river, a young guide named May was navigating her first season. She had studied Chen's techniques and admired his reputation, but when she saw the swollen rapids, she made a different choice. Instead of fighting the river's power, she decided to dance with it. May read the water's energy and moved with it rather than against it. When the current pushed her raft toward a rock, she used that momentum to slingshot around it. When the river wanted to take her left, she went left and found passages she had never seen before. She trusted the water's wisdom instead of imposing her own will. By the end of the day, Chen's group was battered, exhausted, and traumatized. They had survived, but barely, and several passengers demanded refunds. May's group, however, emerged exhilarated and transformed. They had experienced something magical, not the conquest of nature, but a harmonious dance with forces beyond their control. That night, Chen sat by the river, humbled and confused. "I've been guiding this river for 20 years, he said to himself. How did a novice handle what I could not? As if the river itself was answering, he watched the water flow effortlessly around rocks that had stopped his raft cold. The water never fought, it simply found the path of least resistance and followed it with complete trust. In that moment, Chen understood that he had been trying to control something that was meant to be partnered with. This story captures one of the most challenging truths about human nature. Our desperate need to control often blocks the very flow we're trying to direct. We mistake the steering wheel for the entire car, forgetting that the road, the weather, and the destination all play roles in where we end up. Buddha observed this pattern with profound clarity. He saw that human suffering often stems not from external circumstances, but from our resistance to those circumstances. Our need to control outcomes, manage other people's responses, and dictate life's timing creates more turbulence than the actual challenges we face. There's an ancient Zen story about a student who came to his master in great distress. "Master," he said, "I try so hard to control my thoughts, but they keep arising. I try to control my emotions, but they keep changing. I try to control my life, but it keeps surprising me. What am I doing wrong?" The master led him to a window overlooking a garden where the wind was blowing through the trees. "Do you see those trees trying to control the wind?" the master asked. "Of course not," the student replied. "That would be impossible." "And yet," the master observed, "notice how beautifully they dance with it. They bend without breaking, sway without falling, respond without resisting. This is the secret you're seeking, not control, but graceful response." The student was puzzled. "But surely I must have some control over my life. Otherwise, what's the point of effort or intention?" The master smiled. "You can choose the quality of your response to what arises, but you cannot choose what arises. You can plant seeds with care and attention, but you cannot force them to grow according to your timeline. You can offer love generously, but you cannot control whether it's received. The art is knowing where your power lies and where it doesn't." This distinction between influence and control is crucial. We have tremendous influence over our thoughts, our actions, our responses, and our growth. But we have very little control over outcomes, other people's choices, timing, or the countless variables that shape our experience. Consider Maria, a project manager who approached every aspect of her work and personal life like a military operation. She created detailed schedules for her family, color-coded calendars for every activity, and backup plans for her backup plans. Maria believed that thorough planning and careful control could prevent problems before they occurred. But life, as life tends to do, kept refusing to follow Maria's scripts. Her children would get sick on important days, traffic would delay crucial meetings, and unexpected opportunities would arise that didn't fit her predetermined timeline. The more rigidly she planned, the more stressed she became when reality deviated from her expectations. Maria's wake-up call came during her daughter's birthday party. She had planned every detail meticulously: decorations, games, food, even a minute-by-minute schedule. When a sudden rainstorm forced the outdoor party inside, Maria spent the entire celebration frantically trying to execute her outdoor plan in an indoor space. While Maria was stressed and frustrated, trying to control what couldn't be controlled, Her daughter and friends were having a wonderful time playing impromptu games in the living room. They didn't need Maria's perfect plan. They needed her presence and joy. But Maria was too busy fighting reality to be present for the reality that was actually unfolding. This is what Buddha meant when he taught that attachment is the root of suffering. Attachment, in Buddhist terms, isn't about caring or loving deeply. It's about clinging to specific outcomes, demanding that life conform to our expectations, and suffering when it doesn't. There's another Zen teaching story about a farmer who was so determined to grow the perfect crop that he would go out every night and tug on his seedlings to make them grow faster. Each morning, he would find his plants wilted and damaged. He couldn't understand why his intense care was killing what he loved most. A wise neighbor finally told him, "Your plants don't need your force, they need your faith. Plant good seeds, provide good conditions, and trust the process. Growth has its own timing that your worry cannot accelerate." This story illustrates the profound difference between effort and force, between care and control. Effort and care work with natural processes and timing. Force and control work against them. One nurtures growth, the other stunts it. But why do we grasp for control so desperately? Buddha taught that behind every need to control lies fear. Fear of loss, fear of pain, fear of uncertainty, fear of not being enough. Control feels like protection, like armor against a world that can surprise and hurt us. The paradox is that the armor becomes the prison. The more we try to control our experience, the more limited and rigid our experience becomes. We miss opportunities because they don't match our plans. We strain relationships because people don't follow our scripts. We exhaust ourselves fighting against the natural flow of change and uncertainty. There's a classic Zen story about a tea master who was obsessed with creating the perfect tea ceremony. Every movement had to be precise, every gesture flawless, every detail controlled to perfection. He practiced for years, memorizing every step, anticipating every possible variation. One day, a renowned Zen master came to observe his ceremony. The tea master was so nervous about performing perfectly that his hands shook as he prepared the tea. He spilled water, fumbled with the implements, and became increasingly agitated as each mistake compounded his anxiety. When the ceremony was over, the tea master hung his head in shame. "Forgive me, master. I have dishonored the way of tea with my clumsiness." The Zen master smiled gently. "My dear friend, that was the most beautiful tea ceremony I have ever witnessed." The tea master was confused. "But master, everything went wrong. I made so many mistakes." "Yes," the Zen master replied, "and in making those mistakes, you finally stopped trying to control the ceremony and allowed it to happen naturally. Your spilled water became part of the ritual's beauty. Your trembling hands showed the vulnerability that makes tea ceremony sacred. When you stopped forcing perfection, true perfection emerged." This story illustrates the profound truth that our attempts to control often prevent the very beauty and authenticity we're seeking. Perfection isn't found in controlling every variable. It's found in responding gracefully to whatever arises. Another Zen teaching tells of a master calligrapher who spent decades perfecting his brushstrokes. He could write the most elegant characters with precise, controlled movements. But his work, while technically perfect, lacked life and spontaneity. One day, while rushing to complete a commission, the master accidentally knocked over his inkstone. As ink splattered across his paper, instead of starting over in frustration, something inside him shifted. He began incorporating the accidental ink blots into his calligraphy, letting spontaneity guide his brush. The result was the most vibrant, alive piece of art he had ever created. The controlled perfection of his previous work had been beautiful, but this piece had something his technical skill alone could never achieve: authentic expression flowing through him rather than being forced by him. When asked about this transformation, the master said, "For years, I tried to control my brush. Only when I learned to let my brush control me did true artistry emerge. I discovered that the greatest beauty comes not from perfect control, but from perfect trust." This is what Buddha called the middle way, the path between forcing and giving up, between over-effort and under-effort. It's the sweet spot where we take appropriate action while remaining unattached to specific outcomes. Buddha said, "Attachment is the origin, the root of suffering, hence it is the cause of suffering." Well, is the cause of suffering, but he also taught that we can care deeply without being attached, love fully without being possessive, work diligently without being enslaved by results. Consider the difference between a helicopter parent and a wise gardener parent. The helicopter parent tries to control every aspect of their child's experience, hovering, managing, preventing all difficulties and failures. They exhaust themselves and often create anxious, dependent children who haven't learned to navigate challenges independently. The gardener parent provides love, structure, and guidance, then trusts their child's natural development. They're available for support when needed, but don't try to control outcomes. They understand that children, like plants, have their own timing and wisdom for growth. The result is often more confident, resilient children who trust their own abilities. The key is distinguishing between what's yours to do and what belongs to life itself. You can control your effort, but not its results. You can control your response, but not what you're responding to. You can control your preparation, but not the outcome of what you're preparing for. Let's explore some practical ways to build faith while releasing the illusion of control. First, practice the sphere of influence exercise. Draw 3 circles on a piece of paper. In the smallest circle, write things you can directly control: your thoughts, words, actions, and responses. In the middle circle, write things you can influence but not control: your relationships, your work environment, your health habits. In the largest circle, write things you cannot control at all: other people's choices, economic conditions, natural disasters, aging. Whenever you feel stressed about something, ask yourself which circle it belongs in. If it's in the outer circle, practice letting go and focusing your energy elsewhere. If it's in the middle circle, consider how you can influence it without trying to control it. If it's in the inner circle, take appropriate action. Second, develop what could be called gardener's faith. A gardener plants seeds, waters them, provides good soil and adequate light, then trusts the process of growth. She doesn't dig up the seeds every day to check their progress. She doesn't try to force flowers to bloom before their time. She does her part and trusts nature to do its part. Apply this same principle to areas where you've been over-controlling. In relationships, offer love and support without demanding specific responses. In work, give your best effort without attachment to particular outcomes. In parenting, provide guidance and structure while trusting your children's natural development. Third, practice the open hand meditation. Sit quietly and imagine holding something you've been trying to control in your closed fist. Feel the tension of gripping tightly. Now slowly open your hand, keeping whatever you're holding in your open palm. Notice the difference between holding and gripping, between supporting and controlling. This physical practice helps your body understand what emotional release feels like. You can still care for what's in your open palm, but it's free to stay or go as it needs to. Fourth, develop the practice of response flexibility. When something doesn't go according to plan, instead of immediately trying to force it back on track, pause and ask, what is this situation teaching me? What new possibility is emerging that I hadn't considered? Sometimes, the detour leads to a more beautiful destination than the one you had planned. Sometimes, the mistake reveals an opportunity you couldn't have imagined. Sometimes, the challenge develops strength you didn't know you needed. There's a beautiful Zen poem that captures this perfectly. Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself. This doesn't mean being passive or lazy. It means understanding that some of life's most important processes happen without our interference. Growth, healing, love, creativity, and wisdom all have their own timing and intelligence. Our job is to create supportive conditions and then trust the process. Rebecca learned this lesson when she was caring for her aging mother, who had dementia. Initially, Rebecca tried to control every aspect of her mother's declining condition. She researched every treatment, managed every medication, and tried to prevent every instance of confusion or agitation. The more Rebecca tried to control her mother's disease, the more frustrated and exhausted she became. Dementia doesn't follow anyone's timeline or respond to management strategies. It has its own progression that no amount of effort can alter. When Rebecca finally shifted from trying to control the disease to simply caring for her mother with presence and love, something beautiful happened. Instead of fighting against each symptom, she learned to flow with her mother's changing needs. Instead of grieving the mother she was losing, she learned to appreciate the mother who was still there in each moment. I realized I had been so busy trying to preserve the past that I was missing the present, Rebecca said. When I stopped trying to control her condition and started trusting that each day would bring what it brought, we both found peace. The disease progressed at the same rate, but our experience of it was completely transformed. This is the profound gift of releasing control. It doesn't change external circumstances, but it completely transforms our relationship to those circumstances. We move from resistance to acceptance, from fighting to flowing, from exhaustion to grace. Buddha taught that this shift from control to faith isn't a one-time decision, it's a daily practice. Every day brings opportunities to choose between gripping and trusting, between forcing and allowing, between anxiety and faith. The practice begins with small things. Let the traffic flow at its own speed instead of raging against delays. Allow conversations to unfold naturally instead of trying to steer them toward predetermined outcomes. Trust that your children will learn from their mistakes instead of trying to prevent all difficulties. As you practice releasing control in small areas, you build what Buddha called the muscle of faith, the growing confidence that life has its own wisdom and timing. There's another profound teaching about a Zen student who was learning archery. He practiced obsessively, trying to control every aspect of his form, his stance, his breathing, the tension in his bow, the trajectory of his arrow. The harder he tried to control each element, the more erratic his shooting became. His master watched patiently for weeks, then finally said, "You are trying to shoot the arrow. Let the arrow shoot itself." "Master, that makes no sense," the student protested. "How can an arrow shoot itself?" The master demonstrated, drawing the bow with effortless grace. Instead of forcing the release, he simply let go when everything was in perfect alignment. The arrow flew straight to the center of the target. "I don't control the arrow," the master explained. "I align myself with the target, release with perfect trust, and let the arrow find its way." Control creates tension, and tension creates missing the mark. Faith creates flow, and flow creates perfect aim. The student practiced this new approach, less controlling, more trusting. Gradually, his accuracy improved dramatically. But more importantly, the act of archery became a meditation rather than a struggle. He learned that mastery comes not from controlling outcomes, but from perfecting the quality of his participation. This is the fifth sacred truth. Control blocks the flow of faith. When we grip tightly to outcomes, we create tension that interferes with natural processes. When we trust deeply in the process, we create flow that allows things to unfold with grace. But here's something remarkable about what happens when you start releasing control and trusting life's flow. You discover that letting go doesn't make you smaller, it makes you larger. It doesn't limit your possibilities. It expands them beyond what your controlling mind could have imagined. And that expansion is what we'll explore next. There once lived a wealthy collector named Akira, who had spent his entire life accumulating the most exquisite treasures. His home was filled with rare scrolls, ancient ceramics, precious stones, and artwork from around the world. Every room overflowed with beautiful objects, each piece carefully catalogued and protected. Akira loved his collection so deeply that he could barely bear to let anyone see it, fearing they might damage or steal his precious items. He installed elaborate security systems, climate controls, and protective cases for everything he owned. His life revolved around maintaining, organizing, and guarding his treasures. One day, an old monk came to Akira's door carrying a simple wooden box. "I have something beautiful to share with you," the monk said gently, "a gift that has brought joy to many." Akira looked around his crowded rooms and shook his head. "I have no space for anything new. Every surface is occupied, every corner is full. Perhaps you should offer your gift to someone who has room for it." The monk smiled sadly. "That is exactly the problem, my friend. You have filled your life so completely with things you already possess that there is no space for anything new to enter. You have become a prisoner of your own abundance. But these are precious things, Akira protested. I've worked my whole life to acquire them. I cannot simply give them away. The monk set down his wooden box and opened it. Inside was nothing but empty space. This, he said, is the most precious thing I own. It is space for whatever wants to come. Room for surprise, possibility, growth, and new beauty. Your collections are magnificent, but they have consumed all your space for wonder. Akira stared at the empty box, suddenly understanding. His obsession with preserving what he had accumulated had closed him off to everything he might discover. His care had become a cage, his love had become limitation. This story captures one of Buddhism's most profound insights. The things we grip most tightly are often the very things that prevent us from growing. Our fears, disguised as care and protection, shrink our world until we're living in a beautiful prison of our own making. Think about how worry works in your own life. When you're consumed with anxiety about losing your job, how much mental space do you have for exploring new opportunities? When you're obsessing about a relationship problem, how much energy do you have available for actually nurturing that relationship? When you're focused on protecting what you have, how much room is there for discovering what you might become? Worry has a peculiar quality. It feels productive while being completely unproductive. It gives us the illusion that we're doing something important while actually preventing us from doing anything useful. Like Akira's security systems, our anxious thoughts create the feeling of protection while actually creating isolation. Buddha observed this pattern with remarkable clarity. He saw that human beings often mistake clinging for caring, hoarding for security, and control for love. But true care, real security, and genuine love all require space. Space for growth, change, surprise, and the unknown. There's an ancient Zen story about a student who came to his master carrying a heavy bag filled with all his worldly possessions. "Master," he said, "I want to learn wisdom, but I cannot let go of my things. They represent my security, my identity, my life's work." The master invited him to sit by a window overlooking a garden. "Do you see that tree?" the master asked, pointing to a magnificent oak. "Yes," the student replied. "It's beautiful and strong." "That tree grows new leaves every spring," the master observed. "But first, it must let go of all its old leaves in autumn. If it clung to last year's leaves, there would be no room for new growth. The tree trusts that letting go creates space for what wants to emerge." The student looked confused. "But master, my possessions are not like leaves. They won't grow back if I release them." The master smiled. "You're right, your possessions won't grow back. But something far more precious will emerge. The space for new experiences, relationships, insights, and possibilities that cannot enter a life already completely filled." This doesn't mean we should recklessly discard everything we value. It means examining what we're holding onto and asking whether our grip is serving us or limiting us. Are we caring for what matters, or are we so busy protecting what we have that we've forgotten how to live? Consider Elena, a talented artist who had spent years developing a particular painting style that brought her modest success. She had developed a recognizable technique built a small following, and created a comfortable routine around her artistic practice. But over time, Elena noticed her excitement about painting was diminishing. Deep down, Elena felt called to explore new forms of expression, mixed media, sculpture, even digital art. But every time she considered experimenting, fear would arise. What if the new work wasn't as good as her paintings? What if her followers didn't understand her evolution? What if she lost the modest income her current style provided? So, Elena kept painting in the same way, year after year, protecting her established identity as an artist, while slowly losing her connection to the creative fire that had originally inspired her. She had become like Akira in his treasure-filled house, so focused on preserving what she had created that she had no space for what wanted to be created through her. Elena's breakthrough came during a conversation with a child at an art exhibition. The child looked at one of Elena's paintings and asked innocently, "Why do you always paint the same way? Don't you want to try something different?" That simple question pierced through years of careful self-protection. Elena realized she had been clinging to her artistic identity so tightly that she had stopped growing as an artist. Her fear of losing what she had achieved was preventing her from discovering what she might achieve. With tremendous courage, Elena began experimenting with new forms and materials. Some of her attempts failed spectacularly. Some followers were confused by her evolution. She did experience temporary financial uncertainty, but in letting go of her need to be the painter Elena, she discovered she could become simply Elena, the creative being, free to explore whatever called to her. I realized I had been living in a very small version of myself, Elena reflected. Not because the world was limiting me, but because I was limiting myself out of fear of losing what I already had. When I finally let go of that fear, I discovered there was so much more available to me than I had ever imagined. This is what Buddha meant when he taught that attachment creates suffering. Not the attachment of love or care, but the attachment of grasping, the desperate clinging that closes our hands so tightly around what we have that we cannot receive what wants to come. There's another Zen teaching story about a monkey who discovered a jar with a narrow neck filled with nuts. The monkey could easily reach through the opening and grab a handful of nuts, but when his fist was full, it was too large to withdraw from the jar. The monkey could have simply let go of some nuts and freed his hand, but he was so focused on what he had grasped that he couldn't see the simple solution. Hunters knew about this behavior and used it to catch monkeys. They would tie the jars to trees and wait. The monkeys would literally trap themselves through their own grasping, unwilling to release what they held even to gain their freedom. This story isn't just about monkeys, it's about the human tendency to become trapped by our own attachments. How often do we stay in situations, relationships, or patterns that no longer serve us, simply because we're afraid to let go of what we've already invested? How often do we limit our future possibilities because we're clinging to past achievements or identities? Buddha said, "In the end, just 3 things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go." This quote reveals the profound connection between letting go and fully living. It's not about becoming detached or indifferent. It's about creating space for life to flow through us more completely. The paradox is that the more we try to hold on to life, the less alive we become. The more we try to control love, the less love we experience. The more we try to preserve our identity, the less authentic we become. Letting go isn't about losing what matters. It's about making space for what matters to flourish. Marcus learned this when he was promoted to a leadership position at his company. For years, he had been an individual contributor, pride in his personal expertise and autonomous work style. But his new role required him to guide teams, delegate responsibilities, and trust other people's capabilities. Initially, Marcus tried to maintain his old way of working while taking on new responsibilities. He would delegate tasks, but then micromanage their execution. He would attend team meetings, but still try to be the expert on every topic. He would encourage collaboration while secretly believing he could do most things better himself. The result was exhaustion for Marcus and frustration for his team. He was trying to hold onto his old identity as an individual expert while simultaneously trying to embrace his new role as a leader. Like the monkey, with its fist in the jar, Marcus was trapped by his own grasping. Marcus's transformation began when he realized he had to choose. He could either be the smartest person in the room, or he could be an effective leader, but he couldn't be both. Letting go of his need to be the expert created space for him to become something more valuable, someone who helped others become experts. It was terrifying to release my grip on being right about everything, Marcus said. But when I finally made space for other people's expertise, I discovered that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about asking better questions and creating conditions for other people to shine. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It required Marcus to practice what could be called sacred letting go, the conscious release of identities, expectations, and patterns that had served him in the past, but were limiting him in the present. Let's explore some practical rituals for this kind of conscious letting go. First, practice the empty cup ritual. Each morning, hold an empty cup in your hands and reflect on this Zen teaching. A cup is most useful when it is empty. Ask yourself, what am I filling myself with that prevents me from receiving what this day wants to offer? What opinions, expectations, or fears am I carrying that limit my openness to new experiences? Second, develop a weekly inventory of grip. Set aside time to honestly examine what you're holding on to that might be limiting your growth. Are you clinging to a particular image of yourself that prevents you from evolving? Are you holding on to resentments that block new relationships? Are you grasping after outcomes so tightly that you're missing opportunities? Third, practice conscious release through physical rituals. Write down something you're ready to let go of on a piece of paper, then mindfully burn it or bury it in the earth. As you do so, say, I release this with gratitude for how it has served me, and I create space for what wants to emerge. This isn't about forcing yourself to let go of everything. It's about distinguishing between healthy attachment and limiting grasping. You can deeply value your relationships without possessing the people you love. You can care about your work without being enslaved by outcomes. You can honor your past without being imprisoned by it. There's a beautiful Zen poem that captures this balance. Hold everything lightly, including your opinions about holding everything lightly. The tighter you grasp, the more slips through your fingers. The more gently you hold, the more securely it rests in your care. This poem points to something profound. True security doesn't come from gripping tightly, but from developing the confidence that you can handle whatever comes. True love doesn't come from possessing others, but from creating space for them to be authentically themselves. True success doesn't come from clinging to achievements, but from remaining open to growth and change. Consider the difference between a closed fist and an open palm. A closed fist can hold tightly to what it contains, but it cannot receive anything new. An open palm can hold things gently and also remain available for new gifts. The open palm is a perfect metaphor for how to live: engaged but not grasping, caring but not controlling, committed but not closed. Jennifer discovered this principle when she was struggling with her adult daughter's life choices. Jennifer had very clear ideas about the career path, relationship choices, and lifestyle that would bring her daughter happiness. She would offer helpful suggestions, forward relevant job postings, and express concern about decisions she disagreed with. But the more Jennifer tried to guide her daughter's life, the more distance grew between them. Her daughter began sharing less, visiting less, and seemed to be making choices that directly opposed Jennifer's advice. Jennifer's love, expressed through attempts to control, was pushing away the person she loved most. The breakthrough came when Jennifer attended a meditation retreat focused on letting go. During a guided practice, she was invited to visualize holding her daughter in her hands like a small bird. In the visualization, every time Jennifer tried to close her hands protectively around the bird, it would struggle and try to escape. Only when Jennifer opened her hands completely did the bird rest peacefully in her palms. "I realized I had been loving my daughter like a closed fist," Jennifer said. "I thought I was protecting her, but I was actually constraining her. When I finally learned to love her with open hands, supporting her choices even when I didn't understand them, our relationship transformed. She started seeking my advice again because she knew it came with no strings attached." This is the profound gift of letting go. It doesn't diminish what we care about. It allows what we care about to flourish in its own authentic way. Buddha taught that clinging is like trying to hold water in your cupped hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it leaks away. But if you keep your hands gently cupped and open, the water will stay as long as it naturally can. And when it's time for it to flow away, it will do so gracefully without struggle. The sixth sacred truth is that letting go creates space for growth. Not just your own growth, but the growth of everything and everyone you care about. When you release your death grip on how things should be, you create space for how things could be. When you stop trying to control outcomes, you become available for outcomes beyond your imagination. This letting go isn't a one-time event, it's a daily practice. Every day brings opportunities to choose between grasping and releasing, between controlling and trusting, between closing down and opening up. Each time you choose to let go, you create a little more space for wonder, possibility, and authentic connection. But here's what's truly remarkable about this journey of letting go. As you create more and more space in your life by releasing what no longer serves you, something extraordinary begins to happen. You start to discover that you were never really in control of anything in the first place, and that this truth, rather than being frightening, is actually the most liberating discovery you can make. This final realization brings us to the most profound truth of all. There was once a world-renowned conductor named Maestro Yamamoto who had spent 40 years perfecting the art of orchestral control. Every gesture of his baton was precise. Every cue was perfectly timed. Every musical phrase was shaped exactly according to his vision. He commanded orchestras like a general commands armies, and the results were technically flawless performances that critics praised for their precision and power. But as Yamamoto aged, something began to shift. The music, while perfect, felt increasingly lifeless to him. The orchestra members, while obedient, seemed to be going through motions rather than expressing authentic artistry. The performances were correct, but they lacked the spontaneous magic that transforms notes on a page into transcendent experience. One evening, during a rehearsal of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Yamamoto suddenly felt dizzy and had to sit down. As he rested in his chair, unable to conduct, something extraordinary happened. The orchestra, which had played this piece hundreds of times under his direction, continued playing without him. But they weren't just continuing, they were transforming. Without his controlling gestures, the musicians began to listen more deeply to each other. The violinists started responding organically to the cellos, the horns began breathing with the woodwinds, and the entire orchestra became a single living organism, creating music together. Yamamoto sat in stunned silence as the most beautiful performance of Beethoven's Ninth he had ever heard unfolded before him. The music had an aliveness, a spontaneity, a collaborative magic that his years of precise control had never achieved. In that moment, he realized he had been conducting the orchestra when what was needed was to let the orchestra conduct itself. When the movement ended, Yamamoto stood slowly and addressed his musicians. "For 40 years," he said quietly, "I have been trying to make you play beautifully. Tonight I discovered that you already know how to play beautifully. My job is not to control your music. It's to create space for your music to emerge." From that night forward, Yamamoto's conducting style transformed completely. Instead of dictating every nuance, he learned to feel the orchestra's natural rhythm and support it. Instead of imposing his will, he began drawing out the collective genius of the musicians. His performances became legendary, not for their control, but for their alive, unpredictable beauty. This story perfectly captures the final and most profound truth we've been building toward throughout this journey together. Life flows most beautifully when you learn to step aside, not from responsibility or engagement, but from the exhausting effort of trying to control what was never yours to control in the first place. Think about everything we've discovered over these past hours together. We learned that fear is a seed, and you get to choose what grows in the garden of your mind. We explored how true strength lives not in rigid resistance, but in flexible response. We saw that anxiety exists only in tomorrow, while peace is available right now. We realized that most of the storms we prepare for never actually arrive. We discovered that control blocks faith, and that letting go creates space for growth. All of these truths point to this final understanding. You are not the conductor of life's orchestra. You are both a musician within it and a listener to its unfolding symphony. Your role is not to control the music, but to play your part with presence, authenticity, and trust in the larger harmony. Buddha discovered this truth in a moment of profound letting go under the Bodhi tree. After years of extreme practices, desperate seeking, and intense effort to achieve enlightenment, he finally stopped trying. He simply sat, released his grip on outcomes, and allowed whatever wanted to arise naturally. In that moment of complete non-interference, awakening bloomed spontaneously. Buddha's final teaching was beautifully simple. Be a lamp unto yourself. Not control your way to happiness or force your path to peace, but simply be a light. A lamp doesn't struggle to shine. It simply burns steadily and illuminates whatever comes into its presence. This is the art of what Taoists call Wu Wei, action through non-action, power through yielding, accomplishment through alignment with natural flow rather than opposition to it. It's not passivity or laziness. It's the highest form of skillful engagement with life. Think about how water moves through the world. It doesn't fight gravity, it partners with it. It doesn't argue with rocks, it finds creative ways around, over, or through them. It doesn't resist its own nature, it flows downhill, seeks its level, and shapes itself to whatever container it finds. Yet over time, water carves the Grand Canyon, nourishes all life, and shapes the very geography of the planet. You have this same power within you, the power to shape your world not through force, but through consistent, patient, trust-filled engagement with what's actually here. Consider how this applies to the challenges you're facing right now. That difficult relationship you've been trying to fix through effort and willpower, what would happen if you stopped trying to change the other person and simply became more authentically yourself? That career situation you've been forcing and controlling, what would emerge if you did your best work and then trusted the process of recognition and opportunity? That anxiety you've been fighting so hard, what would shift if you stopped resisting it and simply allowed it to be there while you focused on the present moment? Maria discovered this when she finally stopped trying to manufacture her teenage son's success. For years, she had managed every aspect of his academic life, checking his homework, communicating with teachers, arranging tutoring, and constantly monitoring his progress. The more she managed, the more passive and resentful he became. When Maria finally stepped back from controlling his education and simply made herself available for support when he asked for it, something remarkable happened. Her son, no longer rebelling against her management, began taking ownership of his own learning. His grades didn't immediately improve, but his engagement with life did. He started asking thoughtful questions, exploring subjects that interested him, and developing the internal motivation that no amount of external management could have created. I realized I had been trying so hard to help him succeed that I was preventing him from learning how to succeed on his own, Maria reflected. When I stopped interfering with his natural learning process, his authentic capabilities finally had space to emerge. This is the paradox at the heart of all wisdom traditions. The more you try to force life into your preferred shape, the more it resists your efforts. The more you trust life's own intelligence and work with its natural patterns, the more it supports your deepest intentions. Another profound example comes from Robert, a small business owner who had been struggling for years to grow his company through aggressive marketing, competitive pricing, and constant hustle. He was working 18-hour days, barely spending time with his family, and watching his health decline while his business remained stagnant. Robert's transformation began when a mentor asked him a simple question: what if, instead of chasing customers, you became the kind of business that customers naturally want to find? This question shifted everything. Instead of forcing growth, Robert began focusing on creating genuine value for the customers he already served. Instead of competing on price, he started competing on care and quality. Instead of rushing toward arbitrary targets, he began moving at a pace that allowed for excellence and sustainability. The results were remarkable. As Robert's business became more authentic and less desperate, customers began referring others organically. As he stopped chasing every opportunity and focused on doing fewer things exceptionally well, his reputation grew. As he created a healthier work-life balance, he brought more creativity and energy to his business decisions. I discovered that my business didn't need me to push it toward success, Robert said. It needed me to create the conditions where success could grow naturally. The difference is subtle but life-changing. One approach exhausted me while keeping me stuck. The other energized me while creating sustainable growth. This is what Buddha meant by his teaching on non-interference. It's not about becoming inactive or indifferent. It's about learning to distinguish between helpful action and counterproductive interference. It's about understanding when to act and when to allow, when to speak and when to listen, when to guide and when to trust. The Buddha taught that much of human suffering comes from what he called the wanting mind, the part of us that constantly demands that this moment be different from what it is. We want the traffic to move faster, other people to behave differently, our feelings to be more comfortable, our circumstances to be more convenient. This constant pushing against reality creates a friction that exhausts us without improving anything. But when you learn to work with reality instead of against it, when you step aside from the ego's demand to control everything and allow life's intelligence to express itself through you, something magical happens. You discover that there's a current of aliveness flowing through every situation, and your job is not to create that current, but to align yourself with it. Here are some practical ways to cultivate this alignment in your daily life. First, develop what could be called situational awareness, the ability to read the energy and natural rhythm of whatever you're engaged with. Before jumping into action, pause and ask, what is the natural timing here? What wants to emerge? How can I support what's already trying to happen rather than forcing something that isn't ready? Second, practice the art of responsive presence. Instead of entering situations with a predetermined agenda, enter with awareness and availability. Listen more than you speak. Feel into what's needed before deciding what to do. Let your actions arise from genuine response to what you sense, rather than from anxiety or habit. Third, cultivate trust in the process of unfolding. This doesn't mean being passive or abandoning responsibility. It means doing your part thoroughly, while trusting that other parts of the equation will resolve themselves in their own time. Plant good seeds, water them consistently, and trust the mysterious process of growth. Fourth, learn to recognize the difference between resistance and natural boundaries. When something isn't working, despite good faith effort, it might not need more force, it might need different timing, a different approach, or the wisdom to let it go entirely. Sometimes, the most powerful action is the decision not to act. There's a beautiful Zen story that illustrates this perfectly. A student asked his master, "What is the way?" The master replied, "When you are hungry, eat. When you are tired, rest. When you are walking, just walk." The student was confused. "But master, everyone does those things. What's so special about it?" The master smiled. "When most people eat, they are thinking about work. When they rest, they are worrying about tomorrow. When they walk, they are planning their destination. Very few people are ever fully where they are, doing what they're doing with complete presence. This complete presence is the way. This is the essence of stepping aside, not stepping away from life, but stepping aside from the mental commentary and controlling effort that prevents you from being fully alive. When you're having a conversation, just have the conversation. When you're working, just work. When you're loving, just love. When you're resting, just rest. This simple presence is more powerful than all your strategies and worries combined. Consider how this applies to parenting. The parent who steps aside from the need to control their child's every experience creates space for the child to develop their own judgment, resilience, and authentic self. This doesn't mean neglecting parental responsibilities. It means fulfilling them with trust rather than anxiety. Or consider how this applies to creativity. The writer who steps aside from the need to control every word often finds that the most beautiful phrases flow through them rather than from them. The artist who trusts the creative process often produces work that surprises even themselves with its depth and authenticity. Even in leadership, those who step aside from the ego's need to be right about everything often find that their teams become more innovative, engaged, and effective. They discover that their job is not to have all the answers, but to create conditions where good answers can emerge from the collective wisdom of the group. This is what Buddha ultimately discovered. You are not separate from life, fighting against it or trying to control it from the outside. You are life expressing itself in this particular form, in this particular moment. When you align with this truth, when you stop interfering with your own natural wisdom and allow it to flow through you, everything becomes both simpler and more miraculous. The 7 sacred truths we've explored together are not just concepts to understand, they're invitations to a completely different way of being in the world. A way of being that's more relaxed yet more effective, more trusting yet more skillful, more open yet more grounded. As you prepare to re-enter your daily life, carrying these insights with you, remember that transformation happens gradually. You don't need to change everything at once. You don't need to become perfectly enlightened by tomorrow. You simply need to remember, moment by moment, that you have choices about where to place your attention and how to respond to what arises. Each time you notice fear arising, you can remember that you're the gardener of your mind and choose what to water. Each time you feel the urge to force or control, you can remember the wisdom of bamboo and find strength in flexibility. Each time anxiety pulls you into tomorrow, you can remember that peace lives only in the present moment. Each time you start preparing for storms that will probably never arrive, you can gently redirect your energy toward what's actually here. Each time you feel the grip of control, you can remember that faith creates space for better outcomes than you could have forced. Each time you notice yourself clinging, you can practice letting go to create space for growth. And each time you feel overwhelmed by the effort of managing your life, you can remember that the most beautiful music happens when you step aside and let life conduct itself through you. This is not a destination you arrive at once and then remain forever. It's a practice you return to again and again, each time with deeper understanding and greater ease. Every moment offers a fresh opportunity to choose flow over force, trust over control, presence over anxiety. Buddha's final words before he died were, "Work out your salvation with diligence." Not force your way to happiness or control your path to peace, but simply work diligently. Work with patience, with kindness toward yourself, with trust in the process of gradual awakening. You have everything you need within you right now. Not everything you want, not everything you think you should have, but everything you truly need to take the next step, to respond with wisdom to this moment, to trust the flow of your own unfolding life. As you carry these teachings forward, remember that you're not alone in this practice. Somewhere in the world, at this very moment, someone else is choosing to plant seeds of peace instead of fear. Someone else is learning to bend without breaking. Someone else is returning their attention to the present moment. Someone else is stepping aside from control and trusting the wisdom of life itself. You are part of a great awakening that happens one person at a time, one moment at a time, one choice at a time. Your personal peace contributes to the peace of the world. Your trust in life's intelligence makes space for others to trust as well. Your willingness to step aside from force and control creates ripples of gentleness that spread far beyond what you can see. So go gently forward. Trust deeply. Step aside when life wants to flow through you. And remember that the most profound transformations happen not through dramatic effort, but through the quiet, consistent choice to align with what is already perfect within this moment. The river of your life knows where it's going. Your job is not to control its destination, but to enjoy the journey, to be present for the scenery, and to trust that the current carrying you is part of something magnificent and wise. Welcome to the flow of your life. Welcome home to yourself.